Billionaire caught in bed with mistress, returns home to pregnant wife, holding divorce papers. It began with an explosive revelation that no one in high society could have anticipated. Renowned real estate magnate Cassian Vaughn was discovered tangled in the sheets with his mistress at a posh Manhattan hotel, mere hours before he was due home to his pregnant wife. That singular moment shattered the pristine illusion of the Vaughn's marriage and sent ripples through every elite circle, from Tribeca penthouses to Hampton's beach estates. From the outside, Cassian appeared to have everything: wealth, power, and a lavish lifestyle headlined by exclusive parties, private jets, and glowing magazine features. By his side stood Delilah Vaughn, a poised and dedicated wife who had grown up in a sleepy upstate town, never dreaming she'd marry into such an opulent world. Yet as the dawn of that fateful morning crept over Manhattan's skyline, Delilah clutched divorce papers in one trembling hand, her other arm protectively encircling her 5-month pregnant belly. She waited with bated breath in their lavish penthouse, each tick of the clock echoing like a countdown to the end of her fairy tale marriage. Delilah had believed with all her heart that Cassian was her soulmate. Their life seemed an enviable romance. Long walks along the Hudson, weekend getaways on his yacht, evenings spent toasting success and the bright future they planned to share. But early clues of Cassian's hunger for both ambition and temptation were everywhere. He was magnetic, effortlessly drawing in wealthy investors and a constant stream of admirers. Delilah wanted to trust his every promise of fidelity until the rumors grew too loud to ignore. From hushed whispers at black tie galas to cryptic late-night phone calls he brushed off as business, suspicion seeped into their home like an insidious fog. Though Delilah turned a blind eye to the perfume clinging to his suits, her intuition told her something was terribly wrong. That morning, however, was more than a mere pang of doubt. It was proof. Cassian had crossed an unforgivable line. No matter how many times he had coaxed or charmed Delilah into believing in their vows, this betrayal was the final blow. Her heart pounded as the elevator chimed. He was on his way up, still unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred. She steeled herself, fresh tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She would not let her child grow up in a haze of deception. Cassian stepped through the penthouse doors at dawn, his once immaculate suit now rumpled, the unmistakable scent of an unfamiliar floral perfume lingering in the air. He halted when he saw Delilah standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Manhattan's shimmering skyline. Her face was drawn, dark circles marking her sleepless night. On the coffee table, next to an arrangement of pristine white roses, lay a manila envelope with ominous legal stationery peeking out. He swallowed hard, a wave of guilt crashing over him. For years he had straddled the line between unwavering drive and reckless indulgence. In truth, it had always been a precarious balance. But seeing Delilah's tear-streaked cheeks and her free hand resting on her rounded belly, he realized that his self-serving illusions were about to exact a heavy price. Delilah's heart hammered as she recalled how they first met. She was a scholarship student at a posh university, volunteering at a fundraising gala. He was the charismatic wunderkind guest of honor, celebrating his big break, a high-profile real estate project that would catapult him into the city's upper echelon. They had fallen for each other's potential, for the shimmering promise of a future built on drive and devotion. But over time, Cassian's thirst for power and appreciation from other admirers overshadowed the genuine love she thought they shared. She held on to every sweet memory of their early years, while ignoring countless late arrivals, suspicious text messages, and the swirling gossip among his business contacts. Now, with the penthouse awash in pre-dawn light, the city that never sleeps bore witness to their private calamity. She extended the divorce papers with trembling fingers. "We're done," she said, the tightness of her throat forcing her voice into a near whisper. His familiar features, those intense gray eyes, the slope of his shoulders, looked foreign in this stark moment. She braced for his denial, or perhaps outrage, but all he managed was a choked apology. "Delilah," he pleaded, "please, let's talk. I didn't mean—" She cut him off. His meaning had never been more obvious. Deceit was no longer an uncomfortable suspicion, but a documented fact. And Delilah, for the sake of her unborn child, would no longer be complicit in the lie. Tension soared like electricity through the penthouse. Cassian's once unyielding composure faltered as he saw the determination in his wife's tear-bright eyes. Delilah felt each second stretch into eternity. She had spent months, if not years, agonizing over whether her suspicions were legitimate. Now the reality was laid out before her like a scalding truth she couldn't unsee. Finally mustering a thread of anger rather than sorrow, she tossed the manila folder onto the coffee table with a dull thud. "You made your choice," she said, her voice raw. "Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Her words stung him as though each was a separate lash of a whip, but he seemed at a loss for how to respond. For the first time, the man who prided himself on smooth-talking every investor, every socialite, every competitor, found himself speechless. As he glanced at her swollen abdomen, his guilt intensified. That baby represented their future, a future he once claimed to cherish. A sob caught in Delilah's throat, but she fought it back. She was carrying a child now. She could not afford to crumble, especially not in front of a man who had undermined her every trust. She remembered nights spent counting the minutes past midnight, watching city lights shimmer through the blinds, hoping he'd walk in with a believable explanation. She recalled how she once prayed it was just the nature of high-stakes real estate, the cost of success and schmoozing. But the text messages, the rumors, and now the damning discovery in that plush hotel suite told a different story. Cassian's face flickered with desperation. "I swear it was a mistake. I was out celebrating a deal. One thing led to another." She shut her eyes. She couldn't listen to the excuses or the half-hearted pleas. This was what heartbreak felt like, knowing no words could undo the pain or restore the simple, loving bond they once shared. She turned toward the hallway leading to the master bedroom. "Take a good look around, Cassian," she whispered, "because after today, this life we shared is over. I won't be here when you return from your next meeting. If you've made it this far, let me know. Comment 1 if you believe Delilah is right to leave immediately, or 2 if you think Cassian deserves one more chance." As Delilah retreated, the penthouse's silence wrapped around Cassian, leaving him in a void of regret. The stinging memory of his indiscretion replayed in his mind. The ambient glow of champagne glasses at a high-profile lounge, flirtatious whispers, the fleeting surge of adrenaline he mistook for excitement. He had told himself it was harmless gratification. He could compartmentalize it, manage it. But now, confronted by the hollow echo of his footsteps on the marble floor, he realized the extent of his foolishness. The cost of that so-called thrill was the very foundation of his marriage. In the master bedroom, Delilah stared at the reflection in the mirror above her dresser. A woman who looked like a stranger. She wore an elegant nightgown tailored for her pregnant figure, but her eyes were shadowed with hurt. Carefully, she ran her hands over her belly, trying to soothe the swirl of fear that rose within her. How would she navigate single parenthood in the city? What about finances, custody, the tabloid gossip sure to follow? She fumbled for her phone, needing a lifeline, and dialed her closest friend, Rosalind Yao. Rosalind had been Delilah's confidant since their college days. While she had chosen a quieter path in education, she knew the ins and outs of Delilah's complex life with a high-powered billionaire. "Oh God, Delilah," Rosalind sighed when she heard the quiver in her friend's voice. "I'm coming over. Don't do anything rash. Just breathe." Delilah nodded through tears, silently grateful for the unwavering support. She wondered if Cassian had any real allies, anyone willing to speak difficult truths to him. He'd always surrounded himself with yes-men and admirers. When she emerged from the bedroom, Cassian was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted by early morning light. He turned to face her, anguish etched across his features. "I'll stay in a hotel tonight," he said quietly. "Give you space. But please, Delilah, let's talk tomorrow. I owe you that. At least a real conversation." She studied him, uncertain if this was a genuine olive branch or more of the smooth talk she had grown accustomed to. Eventually she nodded, exhausted. "Tomorrow then," she agreed softly, though her heart felt like it might shatter anew. By the time Rosalind arrived, Cassian had already packed an overnight bag and left the penthouse. The hush that enveloped the space felt both oppressive and strangely peaceful, like the aftermath of a thunderous storm. Delilah sank onto the plush white sofa, her gaze drifting to the elegant crystal chandelier shimmering overhead. She had loved every tasteful detail of this home, from the modern art on the walls to the panoramic view of the skyline. Yet now each gleaming surface mocked her, reflecting the hollowness she felt inside. Rosalind carefully removed her raincoat, settling in beside Delilah. "Talk to me," she said gently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Delilah swallowed, recounting each agonizing moment. The swirl of rumors, the final, indisputable confirmation that Cassian had been with someone else, and her decision to draw up divorce papers. Through tears, she admitted, "I never thought it would come to this, but I have to protect my child. I can't raise them in a house built on lies." Rosalind's expression was resolute. "I agree. Cassian's betrayal isn't a small thing. He not only cheated on you, but did so knowing how vulnerable you'd be right now." The words were a cold reminder. Delilah placed a hand over her belly, feeling a faint flutter inside. She tried to steady her breathing. In a matter of days, her entire world had turned upside down. The plans she had envisioned, babies, birthdays, holidays spent as a united family, felt like a cruel mirage. Rosalind squeezed Delilah's shoulder. "You're strong, and you're not alone. You can stay with me if you want." Delilah forced a tired smile. "I might take you up on that. I need to talk to a lawyer first. I already have the documents. But is it final enough? Do I really want to do this?" It was the question that had gnawed at her heart since she first discovered the truth. Part of her wanted to believe in redemption, that Cassian could change, that a counselor could salvage what remained of their bond. But the other part recognized that betrayal, once exposed, rarely heals cleanly. "All I know is," she said wearily, "something has to end here, because I refuse to live in torment." That evening, Delilah made good on her vow to contact a top-tier attorney. Through a friend of a friend, she found Carmen Delgado, a formidable legal mind known for her meticulous approach and fierce representation of spurned spouses. Delilah dialed the number with trembling fingers, her nerves jittery. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Ms. Vaughn, it's an honor to speak with you," Carmen began, her tone suggesting she had anticipated this call. "I've reviewed the preliminary information you sent. We need to consider immediate steps to protect both you and your unborn child." Carmen's efficiency and cool-headed advice offered Delilah a strange comfort. Here was someone ready to stand in her corner, shield her from Cassian's potential legal maneuvers, and navigate a labyrinth of financial entanglements. They arranged a meeting for the next day. When Delilah hung up, she stared at her phone for a long moment, her pulse still thudding in her ears. Taking legal action made everything feel heartbreakingly real. This wasn't just an argument she could forget, it was an unmasking of their entire relationship. She looked around the penthouse, remembering how Cassian had insisted they buy this place because he wanted her to wake up every morning feeling like royalty. Now the space felt less like a palace and more like a gilded cage. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. "Cassian." Tentatively, she answered, bracing for excuses or begging. His voice cracked with exhaustion. "Delilah, I'm at the Lucerne Hotel. I can't sleep. I need you to know how sorry I am." The sincerity in his tone sent a shiver through her. "I'm meeting with a lawyer," she said, steeling herself. "I can't let this go on." Silence ticked on the line, taut with tension. "Right," he finally murmured. "I understand, but don't shut me out of the baby's life, please. That's our child." Delilah shut her eyes, tears edging in. "I won't," she managed. "But this marriage, it may be beyond repair." She could almost feel his anguish reverberating through the phone. But for once, his charm failed him. All that remained was the raw truth. He had taken a careless, irreparable step, and Delilah's heart could not bear the weight of his remorse. Feeling torn? Comment 3 if you believe Delilah should proceed with the divorce, or 4 if you think there's a chance for reconciliation. Early the next morning, Delilah stepped into Carmen Delgado's pristine office, an elegant suite on the 20th floor overlooking Central Park's lush treetops. Despite the outward calm, a muted color palette, tastefully framed legal degrees, Delilah's chest felt tight. This was the place where personal battles became formal strategies, where heartbreak transformed into legal claims. Carmen offered her a seat, then closed the door to ensure privacy. I'm prepared to handle everything, the attorney said, her gaze steady. Infidelity is a strong leverage point, especially with a child on the way. Delilah nodded slowly, aware that her emotions didn't matter as much as tangible facts, dates, evidence, assets. She recounted as clinically as possible the suspicious nights, the lingering perfume, and finally the undeniable morning Cassian never came home. Carmen asked pointed questions about prenuptial agreements, financial holdings, and potential joint ventures. By the time they concluded, Delilah was mentally drained. The legal jargon intermingled with the raw grief in her heart, leaving her numb. Still, Carmen's confidence offered a lifeline. "We'll serve him papers," she said. "But if he's cooperative, we can avoid a nasty courtroom battle. Focus on your health and your pregnancy. Let me handle the rest." Delilah clenched her hands, grateful for someone who understood the gravity of the situation and had the expertise to guide her. Meanwhile, across town, Cassian sat in a dimly lit bar in mid-morning, an uncharacteristic move for a man who usually sealed million-dollar deals before lunch. But the swirling guilt pressed upon his shoulders like an avalanche. Sipping a coffee laced with regret, he scrolled through his phone. Half a dozen missed calls from partners, anxious texts from associates. He was on the precipice of losing everything that truly mattered. He recalled Delilah's pained expression, the protective way she touched her belly as if shielding their child from his betrayal. He dropped his head into his hands. An hour later, he mustered the will to call Soren Chambers, a family law expert he knew through business circles. If Delilah was lawyering up, as rumored, he couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Soren listened calmly, took notes, and agreed to represent Cassian, though he warned that in cases of infidelity, judges tended to side with the cheated spouse, especially when a pregnancy was involved. Cassian rubbed his temples, desperation tightening his chest. Could he salvage any part of his life, or was his downfall inevitable? 3 days later, Cassian officially received the divorce papers at his newly rented corporate apartment, a far cry from the warm opulence of the penthouse he once called home. He stared at the legal documents, each sentence an ice-cold reminder of how thoroughly he'd broken Delilah's trust. The bullet points outlined her requests: primary custody once the baby was born, substantial spousal support, and an equitable share of assets. It was more than a financial blow. It was a formal statement that she wanted him out of her life as a husband, permanently. He found himself rereading the same lines, desperate for a sign that maybe he could talk her out of it. Memories flooded him, Delilah smiling in her graduation gown, the day he proposed at a quaint bistro in Paris, their small wedding ceremony where even the toughest business moguls dabbed away tears. How had he let it all slip away? Wearily, he signed a receipt acknowledging he'd been served, then dialed Soren. "We can contest some of this," the attorney said matter-of-factly, "but my advice is to cooperate. Show the courts you're not trying to sabotage her or the child." Across the city, Delilah was packing a suitcase. She had decided to take up Rosalind's offer and stay at her friend's cozy apartment temporarily. The penthouse felt haunted now, reminiscent of broken promises. Each step echoed through the spacious rooms, as though mocking the emptiness of her life with Cassian. She paused at a picture frame on the mantel, their wedding photo. They looked so in love. For a moment she considered leaving it behind, but in a wave of sentiment, she placed it gently in her suitcase. It was part of her history, however painful. She would face that memory in her own time. Later that evening, Carmen called with an update. Cassian had acknowledged the papers but seemed hesitant to fight. Delilah felt her heart lighten fractionally. At least he wasn't planning to turn this into a drawn-out war. She could only hope it meant he understood the severity of his actions. Yet the question remained whether he wanted to co-parent earnestly or simply salvage his public image. For Delilah, the distinction was crucial. She vowed to protect her child from shallow gestures and half-baked apologies. 3 weeks flew by in a haze of legal formalities, medical checkups, and lonely nights spent on Rosalind's couch. Delilah's pregnancy progressed, her belly gently expanding with the life she cherished above all else. Each time the baby kicked, she felt a peculiar blend of awe and sadness. She wanted to share this wonder with someone who truly cared, yet she couldn't trust Cassian. Not now, maybe never. When she finally told her mother, Grace Mitchell, about the impending divorce, the heartbreak was palpable even through the phone. Her mother's voice trembled as she offered to drive straight to Manhattan to help. "Mom, I appreciate it, but I'll be all right," Delilah insisted, feeling a surge of gratitude for the unconditional love that had anchored her since childhood. "I just need a little time to figure things out." Still, Grace's pleas echoed in her mind. She yearned for simpler days back home, where neighbors checked on each other with pies and warm smiles. Yet she also knew her independence, and her baby's future, depended on forging a new path in the city she once loved. By contrast, Cassian threw himself into a rigorous attempt to prove he'd changed. He scaled back business meetings, cut ties with so-called friends who had encouraged his playboy lifestyle, and even started attending therapy on his own. He badgered Soren with calls asking if there was a legal avenue for reconciliation. But as Soren gently reminded him, reconciliation is personal. The law can't force Delilah to trust you again. One crisp morning, Cassian mustered the courage to text Delilah about attending her next prenatal appointment. She hesitated, recalling how lonely these visits had become. Her first few checkups were with him by her side, excitedly asking the doctor about every detail. Then came the missed appointments, the canceled lunches, the spiraling suspicion. After 10 minutes of warring with herself, she replied simply, "It's next Tuesday at 2 p.m. If you show up, you show up." The days leading to that appointment felt fraught with tension. Delilah's heart pounded each time her phone buzzed. She hated that Cassian still occupied so much of her emotional space. The baby's gentle kicks were a reminder of what was at stake, urging her to stay steady, to remain strong for the little life depending on her. Has your opinion shifted? Comment 5 if you think Cassian can truly change, or 6 if you believe Delilah must keep her guard up. The day of the prenatal appointment arrived with an unexpected chill in the autumn air. Delilah wore a fitted maternity coat, her steps cautious on damp city sidewalks. At the clinic, her nerves jangled. She half expected Cassian wouldn't show. Yet as she checked in at the reception desk, she spotted him at the far end of the waiting area. His posture was subdued, hands clasped as though in prayer. He offered a tentative smile. "Thank you for letting me come," he said quietly, walking over to meet her. The tension between them was palpable, but she nodded, lips pressed tight. Moments later, Dr. Iris Carter greeted them with a warm professionalism. "Glad to see both parents here," she commented, guiding them into the examination room. The comment stung a bit, reminding Delilah that while they were still co-parents, they were no longer a cohesive couple. As Dr. Carter performed the ultrasound, the whooshing sound of their baby's heartbeat filled the small space. Delilah felt an involuntary tear slip down her cheek. Cassian gripped the edge of his chair, his eyes shining with an emotion that might have been remorse or regret, perhaps both. For a brief moment, they shared a snapshot of the hope they once had, a moment that highlighted what was at stake beyond their wounded pride. When the appointment concluded, they stepped into the hallway. Cassian opened his mouth as if to say something profound, but no words came. Delilah's gaze flickered over his expression, and she sighed. "Look, I appreciate that you came," she began, steeling herself. "But this doesn't change anything. We're still set for mediation next week. My lawyer has all the details." His lips tightened. "I understand. I just want to be there for the baby, whatever it takes." She pushed the elevator button, arms folded over her chest. "Then do it," she said quietly. "Do it without expecting me to give you a second chance as a husband." The elevator doors slid open, and Delilah stepped inside. Cassian lingered as if resisting the finality of her departure. The last sight she had of him was his drawn face in the corridor, a man trapped between his own failings and a desperate wish to make amends. A week later, the day of the mediation session arrived under a gray sky that threatened rain. Delilah and Carmen headed to a polished midtown office suite, all glass walls and minimalistic decor. Cassian and Soren were already seated in a conference room, separated by a sleek wooden table that gleamed under recessed lighting. The mediator, Nadia Morales, a calm, no-nonsense professional with decades of experience, explained the process. They would attempt to settle matters without a full-blown trial, focusing on financial support, custody agreements, and timelines for property division. Delilah's heart thudded in her chest as Carmen presented their stance. They wanted security for Delilah during her pregnancy and after the birth, with Cassian providing monthly support that reflected his substantial income. They also requested that Delilah retain the penthouse for at least a year, enough time to ensure a stable environment for the newborn. On top of that, Delilah sought thorough involvement in all decisions regarding the child's upbringing, but resisted granting Cassian equal custody from the start. Soren countered with measured words, suggesting Cassian would pay a generous amount, but balking at the idea of indefinite alimony. He's willing to cooperate, Soren said, but he has a right to see his child regularly and be a part of major decisions. Cassian watched Delilah intently, as if searching for any sign of willingness to reconcile. Delilah avoided his gaze, her posture rigid. She refused to be swayed by longing looks when the memory of his betrayal still felt raw. The hours crawled by as proposals and counter-proposals were exchanged. Nadia skillfully guided the conversation, reminding them that a drawn-out battle would only hurt both parties, especially the child. Occasionally, Delilah would glance at Cassian, noticing the deep circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. She recognized he was struggling, but it didn't erase the heartbreak he'd caused. By late afternoon, they'd hammered out a tentative agreement that would be refined over the next few days. Delilah would receive sufficient monthly support for herself and the baby, along with a structured plan for Cassian to visit the child regularly once born. The penthouse arrangement would stand for a year, after which they'd decide whether to sell or buy each other out. It felt surreal, dividing up a life they had once planned to share forever. Yet as the session ended, Delilah knew this was the path she needed to protect herself and her unborn baby. This is intense. Comment 7 if you think the mediation is fair, or 8 if someone's being too lenient. When the final agreement was drawn up, Delilah's emotions were a kaleidoscope of relief, sadness, and an unexpected flicker of gratitude. She had dreaded a vicious courtroom battle, yet Carmen and Nadia had streamlined negotiations enough to avoid that ugly route. The official hearing was a mere formality away. As the date approached, Delilah found herself reflecting on the tumultuous journey that brought her to this point. She considered how naive she might have seemed, clinging to hope in a man who had been slipping away for a long time. But she also recognized her own growth. Once timid about confrontation, she had now demanded accountability from one of the city's most powerful billionaires. On the morning of the court appearance, Delilah dressed in a sleek black maternity dress. She braved a swirl of paparazzi stationed outside the courthouse, each camera flash striking her like a burst of condemnation. She could hear the faint hum of whispers, speculation about Cassian's mistress, the unborn baby, the big money settlement. It took every ounce of willpower not to crumble beneath that glaring lens of public curiosity. Carmen escorted her through the chaotic corridor, past throngs of onlookers and anxious defendants awaiting their own hearings. Inside the courtroom, the hush was deafening. Cassian looked solemn in a tailored navy suit, standing beside Soren. The judge reviewed the settlement terms, occasionally asking each party to confirm their agreement. Delilah's voice quivered as she said, "Yes, Your Honor," finalizing a chapter of her life she once thought would never end. She caught a glimpse of Cassian wiping his brow, as though the weight of his actions had finally settled on him. When the gavel struck, sealing the divorce, Delilah felt her heart jolt. It was official. She was no longer Mrs. Vaughn, a role that had defined so much of her identity. In that moment, raw tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. Carmen's reassuring touch on her shoulder reminded her that this was not just an end, but a new beginning. One without the stifling presence of betrayal. Stepping outside the courthouse, she breathed in the crisp air, ignoring the paparazzi's intrusive clicks. She had taken control of her life, and she vowed never to relinquish that power again. In the days that followed, Delilah moved the last of her belongings into a snug, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn. With the settlement in place, she had enough financial security to step away from Cassian's world completely if she wished. Nonetheless, she remained open to letting him join certain milestones, an occasional ultrasound, a parenting class. Because above all, she wanted her child to feel loved by both parents. Even so, every interaction was cautious, bound by the legal framework they'd established. There would be no illusions of romantic reconciliation, no tearful confessions or dramatic final kisses. Instead, they communicated mainly through text or lawyers, each conversation carefully monitored to avoid reigniting old wounds. Rosalind often visited, bringing home-cooked meals and laughter to Delilah's tiny living room. On a breezy afternoon, as they assembled an IKEA crib, they found themselves reminiscing about simpler times. "Remember when we were worried about passing final exams and figuring out the cheapest rent?" Rosalind teased, tapping a wooden plank into place. Delilah smiled wryly. "Life was complicated then. Little did I know that was nothing compared to tangling with a billionaire husband's infidelity." They shared a brief laugh, a moment of lightness in what had been a dark season. Yet Delilah recognized a resilience in herself that she never knew existed. She had confronted heartbreak, weathered swirling gossip, and protected her baby's future, an unthinkable feat even a year ago. As she looked around the modest but charming space, she felt something close to peace settle in her chest. She no longer needed the vaulted ceilings and designer chandeliers to feel secure. Meanwhile, Cassian wrestled with a profound sense of loss. He poured himself into therapy sessions, acknowledging his self-destructive desire for attention and the emptiness that lingered behind his grand ambitions. Each day he confronted the bruising reality that he'd traded genuine love for fleeting thrills. Friends asked if he regretted it. "More than anything," he'd reply, though regret couldn't piece his marriage back together. And so he began to shape a new version of himself, one that would face fatherhood with sincerity, even if Delilah was no longer by his side in the way he once dreamed. As the months passed and Delilah's belly grew full with life, a fragile equilibrium emerged between her and Cassian. Occasionally, he would text updates on the child support payments or inquire politely about any baby-related expenses. She appreciated his consistency, though she never allowed his seemingly contrite behavior to lure her into complacency. If he was truly remorseful, it would show over time, through responsible co-parenting and genuine respect for the boundaries she had set. At night, alone in her modest bedroom, Delilah dreamed about the day she'd hold her baby in her arms. She felt a swirl of excitement and trepidation, knowing that one chapter of her life had ended, but another was about to begin. The happiness that glimmered in her heart was precious because it was rooted in her own hard-won freedom. No longer was she reliant on Cassian's devotion or checkbook. She had charted a new path, even if it was a single-lane road filled with unpredictability. The final paperwork came through on a brisk afternoon. Carmen emailed her a digital copy of the certified divorce decree. There it was, proof that the name Delilah Vaughn no longer bound her to Cassian's legal or financial affairs, beyond what was outlined for the baby's support. She stared at the PDF for a long minute, feeling an odd mixture of sadness and relief. As she rubbed her belly, a gentle kick responded, as if to say, "We're okay. We've got each other." Summoning a deep breath, she forwarded the document to her mother, Grace Mitchell, who had been waiting anxiously for closure. Grace replied almost immediately with a text brimming with love. "I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you realize." The validation lifted a weight from Delilah's spirit. That evening, Delilah ventured out to a quaint cafe near her new apartment, ordering a mint tea as she settled by the window. She watched the city's swirl of lights, people hurrying to subways and cabs, life continuing its frenetic dance. Soon she would be caring for a newborn, forging an entirely different daily rhythm. Yet a comforting sense of belonging warmed her chest. Despite everything, the paparazzi, the rumors, the scorn, she had reclaimed her life. One last time, her phone buzzed with a text from Cassian. "I heard the decree came in. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, truly. Thank you for letting me be part of our child's future. I'll do my best never to let you or the baby down again." Delilah read the message silently, tears forming at the corners of her eyes, though she wasn't quite sure why. Perhaps it was the final acceptance of a dream lost and a different dream unfolding. She typed a simple response, one that felt honest in its brevity. "Take care, Cassian. Let's focus on being good parents." With that, she sipped her tea, gazing out at a world ripe with possibilities. She might raise her baby in a modest home instead of a swanky penthouse, but she would offer them something more valuable than any trust fund, a life grounded in truth and self-respect. For Delilah, that was the real happily ever after, one untethered from deceit, anchored instead by her own unwavering resolve. Thank you so much for journeying through this story of betrayal, heartbreak, and self-discovery. If you found Delilah's resilience inspiring, comment where you're reading from and share your thoughts on how she handled her impossible situation. Your engagement means the world, and we look forward to bringing you more stories that explore the depths of human determination.
The city below was a sprawling tapestry of twinkling lights, a world of noise and motion that Lily had always felt separate from. Up here, in the quiet luxury of the penthouse, the silence was almost as profound as her own loneliness. She smoothed the simple fabric of her dress, a stark contrast to the gleaming marble and priceless art that surrounded her. It had been a whirlwind of a month, a confusing, dazzling dream that had swept her from her quiet life as a bookstore assistant to this moment, standing in the home of Ethan and Noah Grant, the most famous billionaire twins in the city. It had begun with a chance encounter in the very bookstore where she worked. Noah had come in first, all bright smiles and easy charm, asking for a recommendation on a classic love story. He had talked with her for nearly an hour, not as a customer to a clerk, but as a person to a person. His laughter was genuine, and his eyes, a warm, sparkling blue, seemed to truly see her. The next day he returned, but he wasn't alone. Ethan stood beside him, a man with the same strikingly handsome face but an entirely different energy. Where Noah was sunlight, Ethan was moonlight. His gaze was more serious, his blue eyes deeper, like a calm ocean. He was quieter, more observant, but when he spoke, his words were thoughtful and carried a weight that made Lily listen intently. They had started taking her to dinner, both of them together. At first, it was strange, but they never made her feel like an outsider. Noah would make her laugh with a funny story, and Ethan would follow up with a quiet question that showed he'd been listening to every word she said. They learned about her parents being gone, about her quiet dreams, about the books she loved to get lost in. They shared their own story of building their empire together, of a bond between brothers so strong that the idea of falling for the same woman didn't seem strange to them, but inevitable. "Our hearts beat in sync, Lily," Noah had explained one evening, his tone uncharacteristically soft. "It only makes sense they would fall for the same incredible person." And now, tonight, they had asked her the biggest question of all. They weren't on one knee, they were both standing before her, each holding one of her hands. Their proposal wasn't a question of if she would marry one, but a plea to join them both. "We want to share our lives with you, Lily," Ethan had said, his voice low and steady. "We want to be your protectors, your partners, your family. You will never be alone again." The promise in his words, echoed by the hopeful, loving look in Noah's eyes, had melted the last of her fears. Her heart, which had felt so small and quiet for so long, felt like it was expanding, making room for this double portion of love. Her yes had been a whisper, but it had been followed by the most relieved and joyful embraces she had ever known. The wedding was a beautiful, private affair. She wore a simple, elegant gown, and stood between her two grooms, each handsome in their tailored suits. They exchanged not one but two rings and spoke vows they had written themselves, promising to cherish, honor and love her, together and individually. It was a ceremony that defied tradition, but felt more right and true than any storybook wedding she had ever imagined. Now the celebration was over. They had driven in a silent, sleek car from the venue to the twins' monumental skyscraper, their new home. The ride was quiet, filled not with awkwardness, but with a thick, sweet anticipation. Ethan held her hand, his thumb drawing slow, calming circles on her skin. Noah sat close on her other side, his arm around her shoulders, his presence a warm and steady comfort. They ascended in a private elevator that opened directly into the breathtaking penthouse. The wall was all glass, offering a panoramic view of the sleeping city, a kingdom of stars laid at their feet. "This is your home now, Lily," Noah said softly, breaking the silence. "Our home." Ethan nodded, his gaze intense. "Every part of it is yours." They led her from the vast living area down a hall to the master suite. The doors were wide open, revealing a room that was both immense and intimate. The bed was large and inviting, and more of the glass wall showed the endless night sky. Lily felt a fresh flutter of nerves, a mixture of fear and a thrilling excitement she had never known. She was a virgin and they knew this. The idea of being intimate with one man was daunting enough. The thought of two was overwhelming. As if reading her mind, Ethan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Lily," he said, his voice a low rumble, "there is no rush. This night is about us, all of us, becoming one. Not just in body but in spirit." Noah came up behind her, not touching her, but his closeness was a shelter. "We will go as slowly as you need," he whispered near her ear. "Your every sigh, your every whisper will be our guide." Trust us to love you the way you deserve to be loved." Tears pricked at Lily's eyes, but they were tears of relief and overwhelming emotion. They weren't seeing her as a prize to be won or an object to be conquered. They were seeing her as their wife, their partner, to be cherished. Ethan leaned down and kissed her then, his lips firm and sure, yet incredibly tender. It was a kiss that promised safety and forever. When he pulled away, Noah gently turned her head and kissed her as well, his kiss softer, more exploring, filled with a sweet, playful passion that made her toes curl. Slowly, with infinite patience, they began. They weren't two separate men with separate desires. They moved as one unit, their focus entirely on her. Noah unzipped her dress, letting it pool at her feet, while Ethan kissed her shoulders, his hands steadying her. They led her to the bed and she lay between them, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a building, wondrous need. Their hands were everywhere but not greedy or rough. They were hands of worship. Ethan's touch was deliberate and reverent, mapping the curve of her waist, the line of her hip, as if committing her to memory. Noah's touch was lighter, tracing patterns on her arm, her stomach, leaving trails of fire on her skin. They whispered to her, a constant, soothing stream of adoration. "You're so beautiful," from Noah. "We are the luckiest men in the world," from Ethan. Their words wrapped around her as securely as their arms. When the last of their clothes were gone and there was nothing between them but skin and warm breath, the world outside the glass wall ceased to exist. There was only this room, this bed, this new and profound connection. The intimacy that followed was a slow, gentle discovery. It was Ethan holding her gaze, his deep blue eyes locked with hers as Noah nuzzled her neck, his hands soothing her. It was a careful, patient joining, where every touch was a question and every sigh was an answer. It was about the three of them, learning the new language of their combined hearts. The initial sharp sting of newness was quickly washed away by a tidal wave of sensation and emotion, a feeling of being so completely filled with love and pleasure that she thought she might break apart from the joy of it. And through it all, they were there, holding her together, whispering promises against her skin, making her feel not used but adored. Not taken from, but given to, completely and utterly. When they finally lay still, wrapped in each other and the soft sheets, the first light of dawn was painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Lily lay curled against Ethan's strong chest, with Noah pressed against her back, his arm draped protectively over them both. She was no longer Lily the lonely girl. She was Lily, the wife of Ethan and Noah. And for the first time in her life she felt truly, completely and wonderfully whole. The dawn of Lily's new life as a wife did not arrive with a jarring alarm, but with the slow, steady rhythm of shared breath and the warmth of two bodies encircling her. The initial, overwhelming intensity of the wedding night had softened into a golden, morning-after glow. As sunlight streamed through the vast glass wall, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, Lily opened her eyes to a new reality. Ethan was on his side facing her, already awake, his deep blue eyes watching her with a quiet, profound contentment. The weight of Noah's arm was still a comforting anchor across her waist, his breathing even and peaceful against her back. There were no words at first. Ethan simply reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his touch so tender it made her heart swell. Noah stirred then, mumbling sleepily before tightening his hold and pressing a soft, morning kiss to her shoulder. This, Lily thought, this quiet, unspoken belonging, was even more powerful than the passion of the night before. It was in this simple waking moment that the true shape of their marriage began to form, not as a shocking event, but as the beginning of an ordinary, extraordinary life. The days that followed began to weave a new tapestry, their three distinct threads intertwining into a single, stronger cord. Lily's previous existence had been one of quiet solitude, her world small and predictable. Now her world was the sprawling, luxurious penthouse, and it was filled with the vibrant, contrasting energies of her two husbands. They established a routine that felt both exciting and deeply comforting. Mornings were often a shared affair in the sun-drenched kitchen. Ethan, methodical and precise, would prepare a perfect breakfast, arranging fruit on a plate with an artist's eye. Noah, chaotic and cheerful, would make the coffee, usually spilling some grounds, his laughter filling the room as he'd tell a funny story about a business meeting gone wrong, making even serious Ethan crack a smile. Lily would sit at the island watching them, her heart full. They included her in everything, from the mundane discussion of their schedules to the grand plans for their future. It was in these daily interactions that Lily learned the unique language of their love. Ethan's love was shown in his quiet, unwavering protectiveness. He noticed everything. If she shivered slightly, a sweater would appear around her shoulders. If she looked puzzled while reading a complex book from their library, He would later leave a volume on the same subject, written in simpler terms, on her bedside table. His love was in the steady, silent ways he built a fortress of safety around her. He began teaching her about his work, not to bore her, but to share the part of his soul that was dedicated to building and providing. He would explain intricate business deals with patience, his voice a low, calming hum, and she found herself fascinated not by the numbers, but by the intense focus in his eyes, the passion he usually kept hidden. Noah's love was its own brilliant sun. He was the one who pulled her out of her shell, who filled her days with light and music. He taught her that joy was a necessary part of life. He would drag her into spontaneous dance sessions in the living room, twirling her until she was breathless with laughter. He filled the house with her favorite music, surprising her with concert tickets to see bands she'd only ever mentioned in passing. His love was loud, generous, and unapologetically affectionate. He was never shy with a compliment, telling her she looked beautiful first thing in the morning, or that her laugh was his favorite sound. He was the one who made her feel fun and interesting and alive in a way she never had before. He showed her the city not from the isolated height of the penthouse, but from the vibrant streets, sharing his favorite hidden cafes and art galleries. Seeing the world through his eyes was like seeing it in full, brilliant color for the first time. As the weeks melted into months, the initial, careful distance between them dissolved into a deep, comfortable intimacy. The vast master suite became their sanctuary, a private world where the masks of the day could come off. Evenings often ended with the three of them tangled together on the large sofa, talking about their day, or simply reading in a contented silence. The physical aspect of their relationship, which had begun with such gentle, patient exploration, naturally deepened. There was no longer any nervousness, only a growing, confident hunger. The touches that were once hesitant became sure. A brush of Ethan's hand on the small of her back as he passed her in the hall carried a new weight of possession and promise. Noah's playful kisses grew longer, more heated, filled with a yearning that made her knees weak. Their nights were a continuation of their days, a perfect blend of Ethan's intense focus and Noah's joyful passion. It was a dance they had all learned the steps to, a beautiful, collaborative act of love. Ethan's lovemaking was slow and deliberate, a deep, soulful connection where he held her gaze, his eyes seeming to see into the very core of her being. He worshipped her body with a reverence that left her feeling cherished and profoundly seen. Noah's love was more playful and inventive, all teasing whispers and thrilling discoveries, his laughter often mixing with her gasps of pleasure. But they were never separate. They moved together, their goal always her pleasure, her fulfillment. It was Ethan's strong arms holding her steady as Noah traced kisses down her spine. It was Noah's encouraging whispers in her ear as Ethan moved within her, claiming her with a tenderness that shattered her. In these moments, Lily learned the true meaning of their unique bond. She wasn't being split between two men. Her capacity to love was simply expanding, making room for two different, yet equally powerful forms of devotion. She gave herself to them freely, completely, her own touches and kisses becoming bolder, her whispers of their names a prayer in the quiet dark. She learned the feel of Ethan's scar on his shoulder, the sound of Noah's breath catching in his throat. She learned how to bring them the same shattering pleasure they gave her, and in doing so she found her own power, her own voice in their trio. They would fall asleep spent and sated, a tangle of limbs and shared warmth, and Lily would drift off knowing that this was not just a marriage, but the most beautiful and complete home she had ever known. The rhythm of three had become the only rhythm her heart would ever need to beat. The golden haze of the first year of marriage slowly deepened into the rich, solid gold of a life built together. The initial, almost dizzying passion that had characterized their early days evolved, not into something less but into something far greater. It became the bedrock upon which their entire world was constructed. The penthouse, once a symbol of impossible luxury to Lily, was now simply home, its walls imbued with the memories of shared laughter, quiet conversations, and the profound peace of a love that had been tested and tempered by time. Lily was no longer the shy, uncertain girl who had entered this arrangement with a nervous heart. She had blossomed into a woman of quiet confidence, her spirit nurtured by the double portion of devotion she received every single day. She carried herself with a new grace, a surety that came from knowing she was utterly and completely adored. Ethan and Noah too were changed. The fierce, almost desperate protectiveness they had first shown mellowed into a proud, steady partnership. They consulted her on everything from business acquisitions to the color of the new throw pillows. Her opinion was not just heard, it was sought, valued, and acted upon. Their empire was no longer just theirs, it was theirs, a shared legacy. Ethan's serious nature was perpetually softened by her presence, his smiles coming easier and more frequently. Noah's playful energy found a deeper, more meaningful channel, focusing on building a life of joy for the three of them, rather than just seeking the next thrill. They were three pillars, each strong on their own, but unshakable when standing together. The rhythm of their lives was a beautiful, synchronized dance. Mornings were still a cherished ritual, a time to connect before the day pulled them in different directions. Evenings were sacred, reserved for each other, whether it was cooking a meal together, watching a movie tangled on the couch, or simply talking for hours as the city lights blinked on below. Their intimacy, once a realm of thrilling discovery, was now a familiar and endlessly deepening language. It was less about the frantic exploration of new territory and more about the blissful, soul-deep connection of returning to a beloved home. A single glance from Ethan across a crowded room could speak volumes of a private promise for later. A certain playful smile from Noah could make her heart flutter with anticipation for hours. Their nights were a celebration of this deep, abiding knowledge of one another, a symphony of whispered secrets, tender caresses, and a union that felt as natural and essential as breathing. It was on a perfectly ordinary evening, during one of their quiet, cherished moments, that the extraordinary happened. They were in the library, a room filled with the scent of old books and warmth. Ethan was reading a financial report, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Noah was trying to teach Lily a complicated card game, his instructions punctuated with laughter. Lily, however, had been feeling a peculiar fatigue for a few days, a slight queasiness in the mornings that was unusual for her. As she looked between her two husbands, at Ethan's steadfast strength and Noah's vibrant joy, a sudden, incredible intuition blossomed within her. It was a knowledge so profound and sudden that it stole her breath. Her hand, holding a playing card, stilled in midair. Her eyes widened. Noticing the shift in her, both men focused on her immediately. "Lily? What is it, my love?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with concern as he set his papers aside. Noah reached for her hand, his playful expression turning serious. "Lily? Are you feeling all right?" Tears, but these were tears of a pure, uncontainable joy she had never before experienced, welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. A smile so wide it made her face ache broke through. She looked from one beloved face to the other, her heart feeling like it might burst from her chest. I think, she began, her voice a trembling, joyful whisper. "I think we're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was profound, thick with the weight of a dream realized. For a moment, both men were utterly still, the words sinking in, reshaping their world in an instant. Then a simultaneous, explosive reaction. Noah let out a whoop of pure, undiluted joy, surging forward to wrap her in a crushing embrace, laughing and crying all at once. Ethan, usually so reserved, was on his knees before her in a second, his strong hands framing her face, his own eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. A test and then a doctor's visit confirmed it. They were not just having a baby, the ultrasound revealed two tiny, flickering heartbeats. Twins. It felt like the universe's final, perfect blessing on their unique family. The news settled over them not as a shock, but as the most natural, fitting progression of their love. A love that was twice as strong was now welcoming two new souls. The months that followed were a period of immense preparation and profound happiness. Ethan became the ultimate protector, researching everything, baby-proofing the penthouse with an intensity usually reserved for multi-million-dollar deals, his hand constantly finding its way to her growing belly. Noah was the celebrant, talking to her stomach, playing music for the babies, his joy a constant, radiant force that filled every room. Lily felt more beautiful and powerful than ever, cocooned in a double-layered blanket of care and adoration. The birth of their son and daughter, Alexander and Isabella, was the most defining moment of their lives. In a sun-filled hospital room, holding the two tiny, perfect beings in her arms, with Ethan on one side, his finger captured in his son's strong grip, and Noah on the other, gently stroking his daughter's cheek, Lily knew this was the completion of their promise. This was their forever. The final scene of their story unfolded several years later, in the private garden atop their building. The sky was painted with the warm hues of a setting sun. Alexander, a serious little boy with Ethan's deep blue eyes, was being carried on his father's shoulders, pointing earnestly at a passing airplane. Isabella, all bright smiles and boundless energy, her laughter an echo of Noah's, was being chased by her playful father around a flowering bush. Lily sat on a comfortable bench watching them. Her heart was so full it felt like a physical warmth in her chest. She was no longer just Lily, the wife of Ethan and Noah. She was a mother, the heart of a family. She looked at her two husbands, the twin pillars of her world, and her two beautiful children. The journey had begun with a nervous promise in a glittering penthouse, a promise to never let her be lonely. That promise had been kept in ways she could never have imagined. It had been woven through gentle nights of discovery, through the steady rhythm of daily life, and had now blossomed into this: a garden filled with laughter, a home filled with love, a forever built for five. Their unique, powerful love had not just survived. It had multiplied, creating a legacy that would last for generations. We hope you cherish the journey of Lily, Ethan, and Noah. If you want to discover more unforgettable stories of love, passion, and unique relationships, make sure to subscribe. New tales of heart and romance are waiting for you just a click away.